Sarah Hartwell stood at the fence, her fingers trembling against the unsigned release papers. Before her, a skeletal bull elephant lay collapsed in the African dust, his massive chest rising and falling in labored gasps. Inside the enclosure, a 2-month-old calf screamed a sound that tore through the evening air like a prayer unanswered. 47 days. That's how long the bull had maintained his vigil outside her research station, refusing food, refusing to leave, refusing to abandon the baby he'd carried 73 kilometers through scorching savanna to save. Now the elephant was dying, and Sarah held the power to reunite them if she could bring herself to break every regulation she'd ever written. Behind her, Jake Mwangi's voice cut through the twilight. "He's dying for that baby, Doc!" Sarah stared at the papers, then at the sunset bleeding across the Namibian horizon. She had less than an hour to decide if she remembered what it meant to be human. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. 3 years earlier, Dr. Sarah Hartwell had been at the pinnacle of her career, the most sought-after elephant veterinarian in southern Africa. Then came the emergency call, a matriarch down with infected wounds, her calf beside her, both in danger. Sarah had arrived with confidence born of 2 decades' experience. The elephant hadn't meant to attack. She was protecting her baby, driven by instinct and pain. But when Sarah approached too quickly, the matriarch charged. Sarah remembered the moment of impact, 3 tons of terrified mother knocking her to the ground, 4 ribs cracked, a lung punctured, 8 minutes trapped beneath the elephant's shadow. Certain death was coming. It never did. The elephant had simply stood over her, trumpet calling, until the team arrived. But Sarah's body healed faster than her mind. She never touched an elephant again. 18 months after the incident, her husband Thomas lost his battle with cancer. Sarah had nursed him through 8 months of decline, following every protocol, every treatment plan the doctors recommended. He'd begged to go home, to die in their bed rather than the sterile hospice room. She'd insisted on the medical guidelines. He'd suffered 4 extra months and died anyway, but in a hospital, not home. His last coherent words still haunted her. "You loved the science more than you loved me." Now, at 55, Sarah directed the Etosha research station from behind a desk. The facility sat on the edge of Namibia's vast conservation area, a small compound of buildings surrounded by endless savanna. Her team was lean Jake Mwangi, the head ranger whose American efficiency blended with his Kenyan heritage's deep respect for wildlife, Amy Chen, a bright young researcher, and 2 junior staff members. The station's mission was clear: rescue, rehabilitate, release. International protocols dictated minimum rehabilitation periods, 6 months for orphaned elephant calves. Sarah had helped write those regulations 15 years ago. They were based on sound science, careful data, lives saved through patience. She lived by those rules now. They kept her safe, structured, in control. Her office walls told the story of her isolation photographs of Thomas, smiling in happier times. A single photo of her son Marcus at age 8, arms around her neck. They hadn't spoken in 14 months, not since Marcus accused her of caring more about elephants than family. Every morning, Sarah rose at 5, made coffee, and buried herself in paperwork until sunset. She watched the elephants through binoculars, observed from a distance, made decisions from her desk, safe, controlled, alone. Dawn broke over the Etosha research station on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday. Jake Mwangi was making his morning rounds when he stopped dead at the perimeter fence. His radio crackled to life. "Doc, you need to see this. Now." Sarah grabbed her binoculars and moved to her office window. Through the glass, she watched an extraordinary scene unfold. A massive bull elephant stood at the station's gate. His right tusk was broken off at the base, an old injury, long healed. But what captured Sarah's attention was what he carried, cradled gently in his trunk, was a tiny calf, no more than 2 months old, barely moving. The bull approached the gate with deliberate slowness. He placed the calf carefully on the ground, then did something Sarah had never witnessed in 20 years of fieldwork. The enormous animal lowered himself to his knees and bowed his head, the elephant equivalent of complete submission. Through her binoculars, Sarah examined the calf. Even from this distance, she could see the grotesque swelling at the base of his trunk, an abscess, severe and infected. The baby's breathing was shallow, his skin dull. He was dying. "Doc," Jake's voice crackled over the radio. "What do we do?" Sarah's first instinct was protocol: observe from distance, contact wildlife services, wait for the specialized team. But something held her attention. The bull elephant remained kneeling for 1 hour, then 2. He didn't eat, didn't drink, just waited. His enormous head lowered in supplication. Amy, the young researcher, appeared beside Sarah at the window. "Maybe he knows we can help." Sarah wanted to dismiss this as anthropomorphization. But she'd seen enough wildlife behavior to know better. Elephants were intelligent, had long memories. This bull's actions were deliberate, purposeful. By noon, the calf had begun convulsing. Sarah checked her watch. The specialized team was 8 hours away. The baby wouldn't survive 8 hours. "Doc," Jake's voice held urgency. "Baby won't make it if we wait." Sarah stood at the window, paralyzed by competing fears. Protocol dictated patience, but the calf was dying now, this moment, while she hid behind regulations and safety glass. She thought of Thomas, waiting in that hospice bed while she insisted on following treatment protocols. She thought of all the distance she'd built between herself and the world. Her hand shook as she lifted the radio. "Tranquilize the calf only. Sedate for emergency examination." "What about the bull?" Jake asked. Sarah watched the massive elephant through her binoculars. "Don't touch him. Let's see what he does." The team approached with extreme caution. Tranquilizer rifles ready. The bull watched them with dark, intelligent eyes but made no aggressive move. When Jake carefully lifted the sedated calf, the elephant backed away slowly, deliberately, as if understanding the boundary between wild and human care. They carried the calf, whom Amy immediately named Kibo, into the field clinic. The bull followed to the fence line, then stopped. He pressed his trunk against the chain link, watching. Inside, the emergency surgery began. Sarah supervised from the observation room, her voice guiding Jake through the radio as he drained the massive abscess. The infection was worse than she'd feared. Tropical parasites had created a pocket of necrotic tissue. Without intervention, Kibo would have died within hours. Antibiotics, IV fluids, round-the-clock monitoring. The procedures were familiar, even if Sarah's hands no longer performed them. Night fell. The team worked in shifts, but Sarah remained in her office, watching through the window as the bull maintained his vigil outside. He didn't leave for food or water. He simply stood, or sometimes lay down, his trunk extended toward the building that held the calf. At 3 a.m, Sarah finally looked away from her paperwork. The bull was lying down now, his massive form still as stone except for the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. His trunk remained stretched toward the clinic, as if an invisible thread connected him to the baby inside. Sarah found herself whispering to the empty office, "You really love him, don't you?" The elephant didn't move, couldn't possibly hear her. But something in the scene, the devotion, the patience, the absolute refusal to abandon cracked something in Sarah's chest that had been frozen for 3 years. She realized she was crying. The first tears since Thomas's funeral. By dawn, Kibo was stabilized. The team celebrated quietly, exhausted but triumphant. They'd saved the calf's life. But outside, the bull with the broken tusk hadn't moved, and Sarah, watching from her window, understood they'd only begun a much longer story. By day 5, Kibo had stabilized. The swelling at the base of his trunk had reduced dramatically, and he was taking liquid nutrition through a bottle. The team allowed themselves a cautious celebration. They'd saved the calf's life. But new questions emerged. "Where's his herd?" Amy asked during the morning briefing. "Calves this young don't survive alone. Someone should be looking for him." Jake began reviewing footage from the network of trail cameras scattered across the region. Meanwhile, outside, the bull elephant with the broken tusk maintained his vigil. 4 days now without moving more than a few meters from the fence line. The team took turns bringing him water and fresh vegetation. He would drink deeply from the buckets they left, but ignored the food entirely. Sarah watched from her office window, documenting his behavior with clinical detachment that felt increasingly hollow. She noticed details through her binoculars. The broken tusk was an old wound, years healed, the ivory smoothed by time. The bull himself was older than typical breeding males, perhaps in his 30s, mature but not elderly. His body, though weakening from days without food, still showed the powerful musculature of a healthy animal. Where had he found Kibo? And why this devotion to a calf that couldn't possibly be his own offspring on day 6? Jake burst into Sarah's office with his laptop. "Doc, you need to see this." The trail camera footage was time-stamped 3 weeks earlier. A small herd of 12 elephants moved across the screen, mostly females and juveniles, with one dominant matriarch leading. Then the sky in the footage darkened unnaturally. Lightning forked across the frame. "Freak storm," Jake explained. "Hit this area hard. Watch." The lightning struck. The matriarch convulsed and fell. The herd immediately surrounded her, trying to lift her with their trunks, pushing at her with their heads. The footage showed them attempting to revive her for hours, the timestamp jumping forward in increments. 2 days later, the herd finally moved on. The drought conditions left them no choice. They had to reach water or die. But one small form remained behind, too young and weak to keep pace. Kibo, alone beside his mother's body. "Jesus," Sarah whispered. "There's more," Jake said, pulling up another file. "This camera is 50 kilometers northwest, 8 days ago." The footage showed Kibo, barely alive, lying in the sparse shade of an acacia tree. His tiny trunk moved weakly, searching for his mother who would never return. Then a large shape entered the frame. A bull elephant, moving with purpose. The broken right tusk was unmistakable. Sarah leaned closer to the screen. The bull Baraka. As Amy had started calling him, approached the dying calf carefully. He extended his trunk, investigating. Kibo made a weak sound, more whimper than trumpet. What happened next made Sarah's breath catch. Baraka gently worked his trunk under the calf's body and lifted. The tiny elephant draped across the bull's massive trunk like a child in a parent's arms. Then Baraka turned and began walking with clear direction and purpose. "I tracked it across 3 more cameras," Jake said. 73 kilometers, 4 days, 3 nights. Temperatures hit 40 degrees Celsius during the day. He played more footage. Baraka stopping every few hours to spray Kibo with water from his own mouth, precious moisture he'd stored. The bull positioning his enormous body to shade the calf from the merciless sun. At night, lying down to shelter Kibo against his belly. "He was heading here the whole time," Jake said quietly. "Straight to the research station, like he knew exactly where to bring him." Sarah watched the footage a second time, then a third. "He's not even related to the baby," Amy said from the doorway, where she'd been watching. "Why would he do this?" Jake's voice was soft. "Because nobody else would." The words hung in the air. Sarah stared at the frozen image on screen, Baraka's trunk cradling Kibo with infinite gentleness. This wasn't instinct or biology. Bull elephants didn't adopt orphaned calves. They didn't carry dying babies across 73 kilometers of brutal terrain. This was choice. Deliberate, conscious, inexplicable choice. Sarah thought of Marcus, her son, whom she'd failed to reach across a gap far smaller than 73 kilometers. Marcus, who'd needed her after Thomas died, but she'd been too broken to break through her own walls. What made someone choose to love when they had no obligation to, when it cost them everything and offered nothing in return? The bull outside hadn't eaten in 5 days. He was weakening, visibly thinner each morning. But still he waited, unwilling to abandon the baby he'd chosen to save. Sarah closed her laptop slowly. "That elephant out there," she said, her voice rough, "is a better father than most humans I know." Jake and Amy exchanged glances but said nothing. Sarah turned back to her window. Baraka stood at the fence, his trunk extended toward the building where Kibo slept, recovering from wounds that should have killed him. A bull with a broken tusk and an apparently unbreakable heart. "Keep monitoring both of them," Sarah said. "Every hour. I want to know everything." That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing that footage, the careful way Baraka had lifted Kibo, the patience in every movement, the absolute refusal to give up. She picked up her phone 3 times to call Marcus. Put it down 3 times. Outside her window, Baraka kept his vigil beneath the African stars. Week 2 began with cautious optimism. Kibo grew stronger daily, his appetite returning with a vengeance. He graduated from bottle feeding to eating mashed vegetation supplemented with nutrients. His playful personality emerged curious, mischievous, constantly exploring his enclosure with the wonder of a toddler discovering the world. Amy became his primary caregiver, spending hours with him each day. She taught him to use his trunk properly, to dust bathe in the sand pile they'd created, to respond to gentle vocal cues. Kibo followed her everywhere, his small trunk wrapped around her leg like a child holding a parent's hand. But every evening, as the sun dropped toward the horizon, Kibo would abandon his play and rush to the fence. There, separated by chain link, he would reach his trunk toward Baraka. The bull would lower his massive head, and they would touch trunk to trunk, forehead to forehead in a ritual that made even the most clinical researcher's eyes water. Sarah watched these reunions through her binoculars. Every single night, she documented them in her log with scientific precision. Subject displays strong attachment to adult male, separation anxiety evident, vocalization increases when visual contact is interrupted. But the words on the page couldn't capture what she was actually witnessing. Love, pure, uncomplicated, absolute. By week 3, Kibo was healthy enough to access the outdoor enclosure during daylight hours. The moment the door opened, he would charge outside and sprint directly to the section of fence where Baraka waited. They would spend hours there, the bull teaching through the barrier, demonstrating how to strip bark from branches, how to create a proper dust cloud for bathing, how to make different vocalizations. Kibo mimicked everything with devoted concentration. Jake set up a camera to record their interactions. The footage was extraordinary. Baraka would pick up a stick with his trunk, show it to Kibo, then demonstrate how to use it to scratch his back. Kibo would grab a stick through the fence and copy the motion exactly. When he got it right, Baraka would make a low, rumbling sound approval. "He's parenting through a fence," Amy said, watching the footage with wonder. "I've never seen anything like this." Sarah hadn't either. In all her years studying elephant behavior, she'd never witnessed such deliberate cross-generational teaching between unrelated individuals. Week 4 brought the veterinary assessment. Dr. Chen, a visiting specialist, examined Kibo thoroughly. "Physically, he's thriving," she announced. "Weight gain is excellent. The wound is completely healed. Motor skills are developing appropriately." "So he could be released?" Jake asked. Dr. Chen hesitated. "Physically, yes. Psychologically, that's more complex. He's showing severe separation anxiety from the bull outside. If we separate them abruptly, he could spiral into depression. Elephants have died from broken hearts." Sarah sat in the briefing, silent. The regulations were clear: 6-month minimum rehabilitation for orphaned calves. Kibo was barely 3 months old. By any scientific standard, he was too young. But outside, Baraka was deteriorating. Week 5 brought visible changes in the bull. His ribs were becoming pronounced beneath his thick skin. The team increased their food offerings, fresh acacia branches, his apparent favorite, but he barely touched them. He would eat just enough to survive, but no more. "He's not eating because he's depressed," Jake said during the morning briefing. "Depression is an anthropomorphic term," Sarah countered automatically. "Then what would you call it?" "Doc, he's giving up." Sarah didn't have an answer. Day 32 brought Dr. Chen back for a follow-up visit. She examined Baraka from a safe distance, using binoculars and comparing observations against baseline footage from week 1. There's no physical illness, she concluded. His organs appear functional, no signs of infection or injury, but his behavior indicates what we call failure to thrive in captive elephants. It's psychological decline. You're saying he's dying of sadness? Sarah asked, skepticism sharp in her voice. I'm saying I've seen this pattern before, in zoos, when elephants are separated from bonded individuals. The medical term is Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, broken heart syndrome. It's real, it's documented, and it can be fatal. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to cite studies, demand data, retreat into the safety of scientific skepticism, but she couldn't stop seeing the footage of Baraka carrying Kibo across 73 kilometers. So what do we do? Amy asked. Reunite them. Dr. Chen said simply, or accept that we're watching one die while the other survives. That night, Sarah made a satellite call to Marcus. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number she'd memorized but barely used for 14 months. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. Marcus, it's Mom. Her voice cracked. I'm watching an elephant die of love, and I'm thinking about what I've lost. About what I threw away because I was too afraid to hold on properly. Please call me back. She waited by the phone for 3 hours. He didn't call. Week 6 brought the crisis to a head. Baraka was now lying down for most of each day. He would rouse himself only when Kibo came to the fence, struggling to his feet to touch trunks with the calf. Then he would collapse again. His breathing labored. Day 38. Jake found Sarah in her office at midnight. Doc, we need to make a decision. He's not going to last another week. The regulations are clear. Screw the regulations. Jake's voice rose, then dropped. Sorry, but seriously, when did following rules become more important than saving lives? Sarah's hands clenched. Those regulations exist because of sound science. We release calves too early. They die. It's documented. It's proven. Kibo has Baraka. Maybe that's enough. We don't know that. We can't know that. So we let Baraka die because we can't guarantee the outcome. Sarah had no answer. Day 40 brought the team meeting she'd been dreading. Everyone crammed into the small conference room. Jake, Amy, Dr. Chen, the 2 junior researchers. The tension was palpable. Amy spoke first. We need to release Kibo. Now. We're killing Baraka by keeping them separated. Dr. Gi Chen countered carefully. Kibo is 3 months old. In the wild, calves nurse until age 2, sometimes longer, without a herd to teach him, protect him, provide for him. His survival odds are marginal at best. Then we're choosing which one dies, Jake said flatly, because keeping them separated is definitely killing Baraka. Maybe Baraka is Kibo's herd now. Amy pressed. Maybe one is enough. Sarah sat at the head of the table, silent. She'd known this moment was coming, had dreaded it for days. We follow established protocols, she said finally. Kibo needs 6 months minimum. The regulations exist to protect who? Amy's voice shook with emotion. Because from where I'm sitting, they're not protecting anyone. They're protecting us from making decisions based on emotion rather than science. Jake's voice was quiet, dangerous. Or maybe they're protecting you from having to make any hard decisions at all. The words landed like a physical blow. Sarah stood abruptly. This meeting is over. Kibo stays. That's final. She walked out, her heart pounding. That night, day 42, she sat alone in her office, surrounded by regulation manuals and research papers. The International Wildlife Conservation Act. Section 12, subsection 4. Orphaned juvenile elephants shall remain in supervised care for minimum 180 days. She had helped write this regulation 15 years ago, had testified before the International Committee, had provided the data, the case studies, the evidence. Premature releases resulted in deaths. The science was sound, but regulations couldn't account for Baraka. For an elephant who chose to be a father when he had no biological reason to be. For devotion that transcended species protocols. A memory surfaced, unbidden. Thomas in hospice, thin and gray, his voice weak. "Sarah, let me go home. Please, I want to die in our bed. Not here. The doctor says the treatment protocol requires—" "I don't care what the protocol says. I'm asking you, my wife, to take me home." But she'd insisted. 3 more months of treatment, experimental drugs, clinical trials, everything by the book. Thomas had suffered through it all, and died anyway, but in a sterile hospital room, not in their bed where they'd spent 30 years of nights together. His last lucid words, "You loved the science more than you loved me." She'd tried to explain, tried to tell him she was following the protocols to save him, that she couldn't bear to make the wrong choice. But he'd just closed his eyes and never opened them again. Sarah stared at the regulation manual until the words blurred. She'd hidden behind protocols with Thomas, used them as a shield against the terror of making a life and death choice and being wrong. And she'd lost him anyway. But worse, she'd lost his forgiveness. Day 44 dawned clear and merciless. Baraka could barely lift his head. His breathing was shallow, his eyes half closed. When Kibo came to the fence, trumpeting desperately, it took Baraka 3 attempts to stand. Kibo pressed against the chain link, his small trunk reaching through the gaps, touching his father's face. Sarah watched from her window and thought, "I'm doing it again, hiding behind rules because I'm terrified of choosing wrong." Day 45. She almost walked outside. Almost went to the fence. Almost touched the papers lying on her desk. But fear paralyzed her. And another day passed. Then, on day 46, an unexpected vehicle pulled up to the station. Marcus Hartwell stepped out tall, lean, camera equipment slung over his shoulder. 28 years old, and the spitting image of his father. Sarah stood frozen in her doorway, unable to process. "Marcus, I got your message." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "I was already in South Africa shooting a documentary. Thought I'd see what you meant about the elephant." They stared at each other across 6 feet of African dust and 14 months of silence. "I didn't think you'd come," Sarah whispered. "Neither did I." That evening, they sat on the office porch, watching Baraka and Kibo at the fence as the sun set. Marcus hadn't said much since arriving, just set up his cameras, filmed some footage, asked clinical questions about the timeline. Now, in the fading light, he spoke. "So, that's the famous dying elephant." "He's not dying," Sarah said automatically. "He's refusing to thrive. There's a difference." "Is there?" Long silence. The savanna crickets began their evening song. Marcus's voice was careful, controlled. "When Dad was sick, you never gave up. You fought for every extra day. I thought that's what love meant. Fighting." "But he didn't want to fight anymore. Mom, he wanted to let go. He wanted us to let him go." Sarah felt tears on her face but didn't wipe them away. "I couldn't. If I let go, it meant I'd failed him." "You didn't fail Dad." Marcus's voice cracked. "You failed to hear him. There's a difference." They sat in silence as darkness fell. At the fence, Baraka and Kibo touched trunks one more time before Kibo was led inside for the night. "That elephant out there," Marcus said finally. "He's listening to what his kid needs. That's what makes him a better father than—" He stopped, swallowed. "Than I thought fathers could be." Sarah understood. Marcus was talking about himself, about feeling unheard after Thomas died, when she'd retreated so completely into her work and grief that she'd been physically present but emotionally absent. "I'm listening now. Marcus." She turned to face her son. "I'm sorry I didn't before. I'm sorry I let you go when you needed me to hold on." For the first time in over a year, they embraced. And for the first time since Thomas's death, they cried together, not for Thomas, for all the lost time, for all the words unsaid, and maybe for a dying elephant who knew how to love better than most humans ever learned. Dawn broke over day 47 with the weight of finality. Jake found Sarah still in her office, Surrounded by scattered papers and cold coffee, she hadn't slept, hadn't left. The unsigned release forms lay on her desk like an accusation. "Doc," Jake's voice was tight. "You need to come outside. Now!" Sarah followed him into the pale morning light. At the fence, Baraka had collapsed completely. The massive bull lay on his side, his eye half closed, his breathing shallow and labored. His ribcage jutted sharply beneath skin that had lost all elasticity. 4 days, maybe 5, and he would be dead. Inside the enclosure, Kibo had gone berserk. The young calf was throwing himself against the chain-link fence, trumpeting in pure anguish. The sound tore through the morning air, not the playful chirps of a baby, but something primal and grief-stricken. He would charge the fence, bounce off, charge again, his small trunk reaching desperately through the gaps toward the bull who'd become his entire world. Amy stood nearby, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah, please, this is torture." Dr. Chen approached from the clinic, her expression grim. "We need to make a decision. Either we euthanize the bull humanely, or we release the calf so Baraka can die knowing the baby is free. Both options violate protocol, but doing nothing is cruelty." Jake's voice was steady but strained. "We can't watch this another day. Doc, we just can't." Sarah stood frozen, her mind a chaos of competing imperatives. The regulations were clear. The science was sound. Kibo was too young, too vulnerable. Without a herd, his survival odds were Mom. Marcus's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. He stood behind her, camera lowered for once. "What are you afraid of?" "Making the wrong choice," Sarah whispered. "Getting him killed." "You mean like how you were afraid of making the wrong choice with Dad?" The words were gentle but landed like hammer blows. "That's not fair," Sarah said. "You're right, it's not." Marcus moved to stand beside her. "But it's true. You're paralyzed because you can't guarantee the outcome. So you're choosing to do nothing while they both die. Is that really better?" Sarah had no answer. She stared at Baraka's collapsed form, at Kibo's desperate attempts to reach him, and something inside her began to crack. The fence. She'd been staring at it for 47 days, always from a distance, always safe behind glass or separation or protocol. Without conscious decision, Sarah's feet began moving, toward the fence, toward Baraka. "Doc!" Jake's voice held alarm. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer, couldn't answer, just walked across the dusty ground 15 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet, until only the chain link separated her from the dying elephant. Her hands were shaking. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 3 years since she'd been this close to an elephant. 3 years since she'd felt the terror of being small and breakable in the presence of something so much larger than herself. Baraka's eye opened slightly. He saw her standing there. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, with what must have been enormous effort, Baraka slowly extended his trunk. Not aggressive, not threatening, just reaching. The same way he'd reached every night to touch Kibo through this same fence. He pressed the end of his trunk against the chain link where Sarah stood. Sarah looked down at her own hand, trembling against her leg. Slowly, carefully, she raised it and pressed her palm against the metal where Baraka's trunk rested. They weren't touching, not quite, but the warmth of him radiated through the barrier. She could feel his breath, labored but steady. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She'd been on the wrong side of the fence all along, not physically, metaphorically. She'd built fences after her trauma, fences of protocol and distance and control. They'd kept her safe from being hurt again, safe from making mistakes, safe from the terrifying vulnerability of caring too much, but they'd also kept her from truly living. Thomas had died alone in that hospice bed because she'd been on the other side of a fence she'd built from fear. Marcus had stopped calling because she'd erected barriers he couldn't scale. And now this elephant, this magnificent, devoted, impossibly loving elephant was dying because she couldn't bring herself to open the gate. The fence wasn't protecting anyone. It was just a cage she'd built for herself. Sarah pulled her hand away from the metal, stood up straight, turned and walked back toward her office with sudden purpose. Marcus called after her. "Mom." She didn't respond, just strode into her office, grabbed the release papers from her desk, and signed them with 3 sharp strokes. Then she walked back out and handed them to Jake. Jake stared at the papers like they might burn him. "Doc, are you sure this violates international protocol? You could lose your accreditation, your license." "I know." Amy's voice was tentative. "But Kibo might not survive out there. He's so young." "I know that too." Marcus stepped closer. "Then why?" Sarah turned to face her son, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt truly certain. "Because I finally understand what your father was trying to tell me. Sometimes love means letting go, even when you're terrified, especially when you're terrified. Protocols can't make that choice for me. I have to make it myself." Dr. Chen moved forward. "Sarah, I'll document that this was my medical recommendation. I'll take the blame with the conservation board." "No." Sarah's voice was firm. "This is my choice, my responsibility. I'm done hiding behind other people's authority." She looked at each face in turn: Jake, Amy, Dr. Chen, Marcus. Then she walked to the gate of Kibo's enclosure. Her hands shook on the latch. The metal was warm from the rising sun. Behind her, she heard the team holding their collective breath. "Want help?" Marcus asked softly. "No." Sarah's voice caught. "I need to do this." She lifted the latch and pulled the gate open. Kibo stood inside the enclosure, his small body trembling. He'd been charging the fence moments ago, but now, faced with actual freedom, he seemed confused. His trunk swayed uncertainly. Sarah stepped aside, making herself small and non-threatening. "Go on, baby," she whispered. "Go to your dad." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Kibo saw Baraka lying beyond the fence. The calf's entire body tensed. He trumpeted not in anguish this time, but in desperate hope, and bolted through the gate at full speed. He reached Baraka's collapsed form and immediately began pushing at him with his small trunk, wrapping it around Baraka's, pressing his head against the bull's face. The sounds he made were plaintive, urgent, begging. For a terrible moment, Baraka didn't move. Sarah's heart seized. Were they too late? Then Baraka's eye opened fully. He saw Kibo beside him, free, touching him without barriers. Something shifted in that dark, intelligent gaze. The bull began to move. It took 3 attempts to stand. The first time, his front legs buckled. The second, he got halfway up before collapsing again. Kibo pushed against him, trumpeting encouragement, as if trying to lift him through sheer force of will. The third time, Baraka's legs locked. He swayed dangerously, his skeletal frame barely able to support his own weight. But he stood. The entire team watched in absolute silence. Even the morning birds seemed to have stopped singing. Baraka lowered his massive head to Kibo's level. The calf immediately wrapped his small trunk around Baraka's, then pressed his forehead against the bull's in the elephant version of an embrace. They stood like that for a long moment, the father who'd chosen and the son who'd been chosen, reunited at last. Sarah felt something break loose in her chest. Not breaking apart, breaking free. Before she could think, before fear could stop her, she was walking toward them. No fence between them now. Just open ground and her own courage. 15 feet away, 10 feet. The team behind her gasped. This was dangerous, reckless, everything her training said not to do. But Sarah kept walking. Baraka turned his head slowly, seeing her approach. For one suspended moment, Sarah saw herself through his eyes, small, vulnerable, entirely at his mercy. Then Baraka lowered his head again, not in aggression, in the same submission posture he'd held 47 days ago when he'd first arrived. Sarah stopped 5 feet away. Her entire body trembled. She thought of the elephant that had nearly killed her 3 years ago, the terror, the certainty of death, the 8 minutes under its shadow. She thought of Thomas, dying in a sterile hospital bed instead of at home, because she'd been too afraid to let him choose his own ending. She thought of Marcus, 14 months of silence, because she'd built walls too high for love to climb. She thought of all her fears, all her fences, all her careful protocols designed to keep the world at a safe distance. And then she took the final steps. Sarah reached out and placed her hand on Baraka's trunk. The skin was rough, warm, undeniably alive. Tears streamed down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for teaching me what I'd forgotten." Baraka held still for a long moment, his trunk warm under her palm. Then, gently, he pulled away. He and Kibo turned together toward the horizon, toward the vast savanna that stretched endlessly beyond the station's boundaries. They began walking slow, halting steps at first, Baraka still weak from his vigil. But gradually the steps became steadier, more purposeful. The team watched in silence as the bull and calf moved across the open ground. 2 silhouettes against the rising sun, growing smaller with each step. Father and son, chosen family, walking into freedom together. Marcus moved to stand beside Sarah, slipping his arm around her shoulders, the first physical contact between them in over a year. Sarah leaned into her son, and they stood together, watching. "That's the bravest thing I've ever seen," Jake said quietly. Amy wiped her eyes. "Which part? The release or touching him?" "Both," Jake replied. Sarah didn't speak. She stood with her hand over her heart, feeling it beat steady and strong, and watched until Baraka and Kibo were nothing but specks on the horizon. Then even the specks disappeared. The gate stood open behind them. The fence still stood, but for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Hartwell was on the right side of it. Day 48 dawned with the weight of consequences. Sarah sat in her office, staring at the empty enclosure visible through her window. She hadn't slept, couldn't eat. The breakfast Amy brought sat untouched on her desk, growing cold. What had she done? Jake came in with the morning report. No sign of them on the nearby trail cameras yet. Could be good means they're traveling, or could mean. He didn't finish the sentence. Sarah nodded mutely. Or could mean something happened. A predator. Dehydration. Baraka collapsing from weakness before they reached water. Kibo too young to survive alone if Baraka died. The satellite phone rang at 10 o'clock. Sarah stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Dr. Hartwell, this is Director Anderson." The voice was clipped. Official. "We've received your incident report regarding the premature release of a 3-month-old elephant calf." "Yes, sir." "Do you understand the gravity of what you've done? You violated International Conservation Protocol. Section 12 explicitly states," "I know what it states, sir. I helped write it." A pause. "Then you understand this is grounds for immediate termination and permanent loss of your wildlife rehabilitation license?" Sarah closed her eyes. "I understand." "An investigation team will arrive at your station within 1 week to conduct a full review. Until then, you are suspended from any release decisions. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." The line went dead. Sarah sat holding the phone, feeling the full weight of her choice settling on her shoulders. She'd thrown away 15 years of building her reputation, her credentials, her authority in the field. For what? For an elephant she couldn't even prove would survive. Marcus found her like that an hour later, still holding the dead phone. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Sarah thought about it, really thought about it. "Every second," she said finally. "And none at all. Does that make sense?" Marcus smiled sadly. "Complete sense." Day 49. Marcus convinced her to search for them. "You can't just sit here, Mom. You'll drive yourself crazy." They took the jeep into the reserve, following the direction Baraka and Kibo had walked. Sarah brought binoculars, Jake brought tracking equipment, and they drove slowly across the dusty terrain, scanning the horizon. Nothing. By afternoon, Jake found tracks 2 sets of elephant prints, one massive, one tiny. "This is them," he confirmed. Headed northwest toward the Okondeka waterhole. They followed the tracks for 3 hours as the sun climbed higher. The heat was brutal, shimmering off the ground in waves. Sarah thought of Baraka, already weakened, walking through this merciless landscape, thought of Kibo, too small, too young, dependent on a bull who could barely stand. Please, she thought, please let them be okay. They reached Okondeka waterhole at sunset. The water level was low. Drought conditions made everything scarce, but a small herd had gathered. 8 elephants, mostly females and juveniles, drinking and spraying themselves in the fading light. Sarah raised her binoculars and scanned each one carefully. No broken tusk, no small calf. Baraka and Kibo weren't there. Her heart sank into her stomach. Jake's radio crackled. "Doc, storm system moving in from the east. We need to head back before it hits." They drove back to the station in silence. Sarah watched the darkening sky, trying not to think about what 2 elephants, one weakened, one too young, would do in a storm. Day 50 brought more searching. They expanded the radius, checking every waterhole within a 30-kilometer range. They found more tracks, evidence that Baraka and Kibo had passed through 2 days prior, but no sign of them now. "They're moving fast," Jake observed. "Faster than I'd expect for a bull in his condition." "Maybe he found food," Amy suggested hopefully. "Maybe he's recovering. Or maybe he's dying and trying to get as far as possible before he collapses." Sarah thought, but didn't say. That night, the storm arrived. Sarah stood at her window, watching lightning fork across the black sky. Thunder rolled across the savanna like artillery fire. The rain came in sheets, turning the ground to mud within minutes. She thought of Kibo's mother, struck by lightning in a storm just like this one. Thought of the herd abandoning her baby because survival demanded they keep moving. Thought of Kibo, alone and terrified, until Baraka found him. What if Kibo was alone again now? What if Baraka had collapsed somewhere out there, and Kibo was crying beside his body just like he'd cried beside his mother's? What if she'd sent that baby to his death? Sarah pressed her forehead against the cool glass and let the tears come. Not quiet tears this time, but gut-wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Marcus found her like that at 3 a.m. He didn't say anything, just wrapped his arms around her and held on while she cried. "I can't lose another one," Sarah gasped between sobs. "Marcus, I can't. I sent him out there. If he dies, it's my fault. It's all my fault." "But he was never yours to lose," Marcus said gently. "That's the point, isn't it? He belongs to the wild. You gave him back. That's all you could do." What if it wasn't enough? What if it was everything? Sarah pulled back to look at her son. "How can you have faith when I don't?" Marcus smiled sadly. "Because you taught me to. You just forgot for a while." The storm raged all night. Sarah didn't sleep, just sat watching the lightning, imagining Kibo's small body huddled against Baraka's bulk, both of them exposed to the elements with nowhere to shelter. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and brutally bright. The team gathered in the common room for breakfast, but no one had much appetite. The mood was somber, grieving, though no one wanted to voice what they were all thinking. Amy broke the silence. "Maybe no news is good news if something bad happened. Someone would have found them by now. Or they're too far away to be found," Jake said quietly. Sarah couldn't speak at all. She just stared at her coffee and tried to breathe through the crushing weight on her chest. At 11 o'clock in the morning on day 52, the radio crackled to life. "Etosha Station, this is Outpost 7. Over." Jake grabbed the handset. "Outpost 7, go ahead. We have visual on an adult bull elephant, broken right tusk, traveling with a small calf, approximately 40 kilometers north of your position. Jake's hand tightened on the radio. Say again. Outpost 7. Condition of subjects. A pause. Then, they appear healthy. The bull is moving steadily, no signs of distress. The calf is... Another pause. Wait. Confirming. The calf is nursing from an adult female. They're traveling with a herd, approximately 15 individuals. Over. The room went absolutely silent. Repeat that last part, Jake said, his voice shaking. With a herd. Affirmative. Atosha. The bull and calf appear fully integrated with the herd. They're at the northern waterhole complex. Sending coordinates now. Over. Jake looked at Sarah. Her face had gone completely white. Then she smiled. Not a small smile, a huge, radiant, impossible smile that transformed her entire face. Then she laughed. A sound that started as a giggle and became a full belly laugh, the kind that shakes your whole body. Amy immediately burst into tears and hugged her. Marcus punched the air with a whoop. They made it, Sarah whispered through her laughter and tears. They actually made it. We should go see them, Marcus said, already grabbing his camera equipment. No. Sarah's voice was firm. No, we leave them alone. They're wild now. That's how it should be. But even as she said it, she was reaching for her keys. Some things you had to see with your own eyes to believe. The drive to Outpost 7 took 90 minutes across rutted dirt roads. Sarah gripped the dashboard the entire way, her knuckles white. Marcus sat in the back with his camera equipment, filming through the window. Jake drove with focused intensity, following the GPS coordinates the ranger had transmitted. Almost there, Jake said as they crested a ridge. Below them stretched a small valley. At its center, a series of interconnected waterholes glittered in the afternoon sun, and gathered around those waterholes was a herd of elephants. Sarah raised her binoculars with trembling hands. There, standing slightly apart from the main group, unmistakable with his broken right tusk Baraka. He looked transformed from the skeletal wraith who'd collapsed at their station 5 days ago. Not fully recovered, but standing strong, his head high, his posture alert. And beside him, splashing enthusiastically in the shallow water, Kibo. The calf had gained visible weight. His movements were energetic, playful, full of the boundless joy of a healthy young elephant. As Sarah watched, he trotted over to a large female and began nursing. The female stood patiently, occasionally using her trunk to guide him into position. Baraka stood nearby, watching, his role clearly that of guardian while the female provided nourishment. Sarah lowered the binoculars, her vision blurred with tears. He found a mother for him, she whispered. Baraka found Kibo a mother. Jake was counting the herd through his own binoculars. 17 total. 4 adult females, 2 bulls including Baraka, 11 younger individuals ranging from adolescent to juvenile. Marcus filmed silently, capturing the scene with his professional eye. The herd seemed cohesive, comfortable with each other, not the rigid hierarchy Sarah usually observed in elephant herds, but something more fluid, more accepting. Something's different about this group, Amy murmured. They're not acting like a typical herd structure. See how they're all interacting. No clear matriarch dominance patterns. Sarah looked again. Amy was right. The elephants moved among each other with unusual ease. The adults equally attentive to all the young, not just their biological offspring. It was almost like, it's like a foster herd, Sarah said slowly. A family built by choice, not blood. They watched for an hour, documenting everything. Kibo played with 2 other young elephants, their trunks entwined in games. Baraka occasionally moved closer when the play got too rough, a gentle giant ensuring safety. The female who'd nursed Kibo, clearly an experienced mother, kept watch over all 3 calves with equal attention. As the sun began its descent, Dr. Chen arrived in a second vehicle with her specialized photography equipment. I heard the news, had to see for myself. She immediately began photographing each elephant, using her high-resolution camera to capture identifying features, ear patterns, tusk configurations, skin markings. I want to run these through the regional database. See if any of these elephants have history with conservation programs. They returned to the station as dusk fell. Sarah's heart lighter than it had been in days, years, maybe. That evening, Dr. Chen worked in the station's small computer lab, uploading photos and running identification algorithms against the comprehensive database maintained by regional conservation networks. At 10 o'clock, she knocked on Sarah's office door. "You need to see this." Sarah followed her to the lab where the computer screen showed a photo of the large female who'd nursed Kibo alongside an archival photograph. "This is female E47, Dr. Chen said. Orphaned at age 5 when her mother was killed by poachers. Your team rehabilitated her here at this station. Sarah, you personally oversaw her release." Sarah leaned closer to the screen, memories flooding back. 7 years ago. She'd spent months with that young elephant, teaching her to forage, to socialize, to survive. The release had been one of her proudest moments, a textbook success story. "She remembers?" Sarah breathed. "She came back." "There's more." Dr. Chen pulled up another comparison. "Female E61, rescued 5 years ago with a snare injury, released after treatment." Another image appeared. "Juvenile E93, drought victim, rescued 3 years ago. Both were processed through this station." Sarah stared at the screen. 3 elephants from her station's rehabilitation program, all in the same herd. "This can't be coincidence." "It's not." Dr. Chen's fingers flew across the keyboard. "I'm cross-referencing with other regional stations now, looking for..." There. A new profile appeared. An adolescent bull from a station 200 kilometers west. Then another female from a facility to the south. 5 elephants in this herd have documented rescue histories from various facilities. Dr. Chen said. "They found each other. Sarah, somehow, across hundreds of kilometers. These rescued elephants formed their own herd." Jake, who'd been watching over their shoulders, spoke quietly. "Elephants that understand what it means to be saved. They recognized each other." "But what about Baraka?" Sarah asked. "He was never at our station." Dr. Chen typed rapidly, expanding the search parameters to include historical records. Minutes passed. Then her screen flickered with a match. "Here." She pulled up a file from 12 years ago. A different research station, 200 kilometers north. Subject: juvenile bull elephant, approximately 4 years old. Circumstances: mother killed by poachers. Calf injured in same incident. Right tusk broken at base. Treatment: 8 weeks intensive care. 2 months rehabilitation. Released after 10 months. Status: successful integration. Name: Baraka. The room fell silent. Sarah read the notes, her hands shaking. He was rescued. As a calf, he was rescued and released, just like all the others. "He knows," Marcus said softly. "He understands what humans can do. That's why he brought Kibo to you." "Because someone brought him once, and he remembered." Sarah thought about the deliberate way Baraka had approached their station, the submission bow, the absolute trust that they would help. He hadn't just stumbled upon them, he'd sought them out specifically because he understood that humans with facilities could save a dying calf. "This herd isn't random," Amy said, her voice filled with wonder. "It's a community of survivors. Elephants who've all been touched by human hands, rescued, healed, released. They found each other and built something new together." Sarah stared at the photos on the screen, 17 elephants, each with their own story of rescue and survival, creating a chosen family in the wild. "They're not just surviving," she whispered. "They're teaching each other that rescue is possible, that kindness exists, that broken things can be made whole again." The next morning, Director Anderson arrived for the formal investigation. He was exactly as Sarah expected: stern, gray-haired, carrying a thick folder of documentation. She met him in her office. her resignation letter already drafted on her desk. He sat down, opened the folder, and reviewed her report in silence. Sarah waited, her stomach tight with anxiety. Finally, he looked up. Dr. Hartwell, you violated international protocol by releasing an underage, vulnerable calf into an environment where standard metrics indicated minimal survival probability. Yes, sir. You acted unilaterally, without board approval, potentially endangering both your career and the organization's credibility. That's correct. Sir? He closed the folder. And yet Dr. Chen's follow-up report indicates the calf is not only surviving but thriving. Integrated with a herd, nursing from a surrogate, protected by the bull who brought him, against all statistical odds. Sarah said nothing. Anderson leaned back. I should fire you, Dr. Hartwell. I know, sir, but I'm not going to... He paused. 20 years ago, I made the opposite choice. Kept an elephant calf in captivity for 18 months because protocol demanded it. Every regulation was followed perfectly. That elephant lived in a zoo for 30 years afterward and never psychologically adapted. He died depressed, isolated, broken. I followed every rule, and I was completely wrong. Sarah met his eyes, seeing unexpected pain there. You made a choice based on observation, intuition, and yes, compassion. You risked everything, and somehow, impossibly, it worked. He stood. You're on probation for 6 months. Any future release decisions require board approval. But sometimes, Dr. Hartwell, the bravest science is knowing when to stop being purely scientific. He extended his hand. Sarah shook it, hardly believing what she'd heard. Don't make me regret this, Anderson said at the door. I won't, sir. After he left, Sarah sat alone in her office, staring at the unsigned resignation letter. Then she tore it in half and dropped it in the trash. Outside her window, the empty enclosure stood waiting for its next resident, and somewhere 40 kilometers north, a bull with a broken tusk watched over a calf he'd chosen to save, surrounded by a family of survivors who understood the gift of second chances. 2 months after the release, Marcus was still at the station. What had begun as a quick visit to film a viral elephant story had transformed into something deeper, a son and mother rebuilding a relationship fractured by grief and distance. They took morning coffee together on the porch now, a ritual that felt both new and comfortingly familiar. Sitting side by side, watching the sun paint the savanna in shades of gold and amber, they talked about Thomas, about the mistakes they'd both made, about forgiveness. I've been angry at you for so long, Marcus said one morning, his hands wrapped around his mug. You had every right to be. Sarah replied, but I've been thinking about something. You weren't just afraid to let Dad go. You were afraid to be left alone. Sarah felt the truth of it settle in her chest. I am. Marcus turned to look at her. You're not alone, Mom. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere this time. They embraced, and for the first time in years, it felt completely comfortable, natural, like coming home. Marcus had been working on his documentary footage, and one evening he showed Sarah the rough cut. The title appeared on screen, The Broken Tusk and the Beating Heart. It was beautiful. Marcus had captured everything: Baraka's vigil, Kibo's recovery, the agonizing decision, the moment of release. But he'd also included something Sarah hadn't expected: interviews with her. Raw, unfiltered conversations where she talked about her fear, her trauma, her choice. Sarah watched herself on screen, vulnerable in a way she'd never allowed before. Marcus, it's so raw. That's exactly why it matters. Marcus paused the video. People need to know that the humans behind conservation aren't perfect. That we're all just trying to choose love over fear, one decision at a time. Sarah cried watching it, not from sadness, but from recognition. When did you become so wise? She asked. Marcus smiled. I had a good teacher. She just forgot for a while how to teach. But she remembered. 3 months after Baraka and Kibo's release, Sarah stood before the station team to announce a new initiative. I'm calling it the Second Chance Herd Project, she explained, displaying a presentation on the laptop screen. Our mission is to rehabilitate wildlife that's been rejected orphans, injured animals, the abandoned, but with a new protocol I'm calling trust-based release. Jake leaned forward. What does that mean exactly? It means instead of rigid time requirements, we assess individual readiness. We look for signs of psychological health, not just physical recovery. We partner with the survivor herds. We've identified groups like Barakas that have shown they'll accept rescues. We create a network across the region. Amy frowned. The Conservation Board will never approve this. Director Anderson already has, Sarah said. Provisionally, we have 6 months to prove the concept works. It was controversial. Some in the wider conservation community called it reckless. Others called it revolutionary. But Sarah had stopped living her life based on what others thought. She'd found her courage, and she wasn't letting go of it. The first test case arrived 2 weeks later. A 6-month-old female elephant calf, found wandering alone, severely dehydrated. Her mother's body was discovered nearby natural causes. The veterinary report concluded the herd had moved on, as was often necessary during drought. Sarah named her Hope. This time, Sarah was hands-on from day one. She fed Hope herself, mixing the specialized formula with steady hands. She bathed the calf, washing away the dust and fear. She walked with her in the early mornings, teaching her to forage, to play, to trust. Her old fear wasn't gone entirely. She still felt her heart rate spike when Hope got too close. Still had flashes of memory from the attack 3 years ago. But she didn't let fear control her anymore. She acknowledged it, thanked it for trying to protect her, and then gently set it aside to do the work that mattered. Jake watched her one morning as she sat with Hope, the calf's head resting in her lap. You're different, Doc. Sarah stroked Hope's rough skin. I'm done hiding. From elephants, from life, from myself. Hope's recovery took only 3 months. The calf bonded quickly, grew strong, and began showing the telltale signs. Sarah now recognized: restlessness, looking toward the horizon, that indefinable quality that said she was ready. She's ready, Sarah announced to the team. Everyone agreed. No debate this time. They'd learned to trust the process. They released Hope near the coordinates where Baraka's herd had last been sighted. Sarah held her breath as Hope walked cautiously into the wild, torn between wanting the calf to succeed and terrified she'd made another impossible choice. Within 48 hours, trail cameras captured Hope being approached by Baraka's herd. Female E47, the elephant Sarah had rescued 7 years ago, was the first to greet her. Within a week, Hope was fully integrated. Nursing from E47, playing with Kibo and the other calves, the circle continued. 8 months after the original release, as dry season settled over the reserve again, Jake burst into Sarah's office one morning. Doc, you need to come outside. Sarah followed him into the bright sunlight. Approaching the station across the open savanna was a herd of elephants. Not unusual, they often came to the water troughs the station maintained, but this herd was different. Sarah raised her binoculars, and her breath caught, leading the group, his broken tusk unmistakable even at this distance. Baraka. The herd stopped 50 meters from the station, all 17 of them, plus 3 new calves that had been born since they'd merged into a family. Sarah could see Kibo among them now, 11 months old, already 600 pounds of healthy, rambunctious young elephant. He was playing with 2 other calves, their trunks entwined in an elaborate game. Then Baraka did something extraordinary. He separated from the herd and walked forward alone, stopped 20 feet from where Sarah stood, and bowed the same deep, deliberate bow he'd made 8 months ago when he'd first brought Kibo to them. But this wasn't submission. This was greeting, respect, gratitude. Sarah didn't hesitate. She walked directly toward him, her stride confident, her fear present, but no longer paralyzing. When she reached him, Baraka raised his head. She placed her hand on his trunk, feeling the familiar warmth, the life pulsing beneath the rough skin. They stood like that for a long moment. No words needed, just recognition between two beings who'd saved each other. Kibo trotted over, curious and playful. He nudged Sarah's leg with his small trunk, making a sound that was almost like laughter. Sarah laughed too, stroking his head. "Look at you," she murmured. "You're enormous." The herd stayed for 3 hours. They drank from the troughs, rested in the shade of the station buildings, let the calves play in the dust. The team watched in silent awe, Marcus filming everything with tears streaming down his face. It wasn't just a herd visiting a waterhole. It was family coming home. 2 years later, Sarah stood at a podium in a conference center in Johannesburg, facing an audience of 300 international conservation professionals. The presentation screen behind her displayed the title, Trust-Based Release Outcomes from the Second Chance Herd Project. "Over the past 2 years," Sarah said, her voice steady and strong, "we've rehabilitated and released 43 elephants using trust-based assessment rather than rigid time protocols. Our integration success rate is 89%, significantly above traditional methods. Survival rate is 95%. The key difference in our approach is simple. We trust the animals to guide their own healing." She clicked to the next slide, showing a graph of outcomes. Traditional protocol success rates hover around 70% integration, 78% survival. We've improved those numbers not through more intervention, but through better listening. The audience murmured, some nodding, others skeptical. Sarah continued, "We've identified 7 survivor herds across the region groups formed primarily of elephants with rescue histories. These herds demonstrate remarkable acceptance of new members, suggest advanced social intelligence, and provide stable family structures for orphaned or injured animals." She clicked again. A photograph filled the screen, Baraka and Kibo, trunk to trunk, surrounded by their extended family. "This is Baraka and Kibo. Their story launched our program. Baraka is a bull who was himself rescued as a calf 12 years ago. When he found an orphaned baby dying in the desert, he carried him 73 kilometers to our station. Against protocol, we released the calf after just 47 days. Every statistical model predicted failure." Another click. Today, both are thriving. Kibo is a healthy 2.5-year-old. Baraka leads a herd of 20 elephants, all with rescue histories, all choosing to build family through compassion rather than biology. The final slide was simple text, "Love them enough to let them go." "The hardest part of conservation work isn't the science," Sarah said. "It's having the courage to trust, to release control, to acknowledge that sometimes the animals understand their needs better than we do. Thank you." The standing ovation surprised her. Director Anderson, sitting in the front row, was the first on his feet. After the presentation, a young conservationist approached, barely 30, eager-eyed, carrying a notebook full of questions. "Dr. Hartwell, I want to work with you. I want to learn this method." Sarah smiled. "It's not really a method. It's a philosophy. Love them enough to let them go, and be brave enough to let them teach you." That evening, Sarah returned to Etosha Station. Marcus was visiting for the week, as he did every month now. They had dinner together, a weekly ritual they never missed when he was in the country. Her office had changed over 2 years. The walls that once held only photos of Thomas and young Marcus now displayed something else, photographs of the survivor herd. All 20 elephants, each with their own story of rescue and redemption. In the center, larger than the rest, was a single image, Baraka and Kibo, their trunks entwined, their foreheads touching. Sarah had taken it herself during one of the herd's visits to the station. She touched the frame gently. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered. Through her window, the savanna stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. And there, in the distance, silhouettes moved against the dying light. Elephants, always elephants. Walking in families, chosen in blood, into the vast freedom that was their birthright. Sarah sat at her desk, Marcus joining her to watch the sunset. They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded and the stars emerged, infinite and bright. She thought about Baraka, who'd taught her that love means carrying someone when they can't walk, about Kibo, who'd taught her that being saved is the beginning, not the end, about Marcus, who'd taught her that forgiveness is possible when you're brave enough to be honest, about Thomas, who'd tried to teach her to let go, and who she'd finally heard even though he was gone. The gate to Kibo's old enclosure still stood open. Sarah had never closed it. It served as a reminder that fences were meant to be opened, that control was an illusion, that the bravest thing she'd ever done was walk through her own fear toward an elephant who'd already forgiven her for taking so long. Outside, the savanna breathed. Inside, Sarah Hartwell breathed too. Free, whole, finally home. I've been thinking about Baraka and Sarah long after their story ended, maybe because their struggle feels so familiar. We all build fences, don't we? Not the physical kind, but the invisible barriers we construct after being hurt. We call them boundaries, protocols, wisdom. We convince ourselves they keep us safe. And maybe they do, but they also keep us alone. Sarah's greatest fear wasn't making the wrong choice. It was making any choice at all. She'd rather hide behind regulations than risk her heart again. I understand that. Most of us do. But here's what an elephant with a broken tusk taught a broken-hearted woman family isn't about perfection or biology. It's about showing up. It's about carrying someone 73 kilometers when they can't walk. It's about standing outside a fence for 47 days because love doesn't keep office hours. Gratitude, real gratitude, isn't just saying thank you, it's paying forward the rescue you once received. It's Baraka bringing Kibo to humans because humans once saved him. It's building a family from survivors who understand second chances. The bravest thing we can do isn't protecting ourselves from pain. It's opening the gate anyway. It's touching the trunk of something that terrifies us. It's choosing to love even when we can't guarantee the outcome. Sometimes the broken ones teach us how to be whole.